Hello. So today we're going to look at chapter 12, so do a mini lecture on chapter 12, and look at 5 sort of points. The main figure in chapter 12 is Odysseus. So it looks at the Odyssey. So we're looking at Odysseus and homecoming heroes. And the Greeks did have a collection of poems called the Nostoi, the homecomings, that dealt with the homecomings of the Greek heroes after the Trojan War. Most of these end badly, and the only one that we have that survives is the Odyssey. So we have that. The others probably were not quite as good, and they generally don't have a happy ending. Within the Odyssey, the main other homecoming that is sort of alluded to repeatedly is that of Agamemnon. And we already know from chapter 6, Agamemnon, when he comes home from the Trojan War, Clytemnestra is still angry at him for having sacrificed their daughter, and she's decided basically to kill him. So when he comes home, she and her lover, who has his own reasons for revenge, kill Agamemnon. So homecoming there turns out badly. Odysseus, there's always the threat that his homecoming might turn out badly, but it does not. The selection that's in the book is from mainly his encounter with Circe in book 10. One other thing about the Odyssey is the idea of Xenia, which runs throughout the poem. Xenia is the Greek word that means guest-host relations. Remember, Zeus, one of his areas of expertise was he was sometimes worshipped as Zeus Xenios, Zeus the god who oversaw guest-host relations. The Cyclops, Circe, and the suitors are examples of bad Xenia. They do not do right. So the Cyclops is Odysseus's host, but instead of serving food to Odysseus and welcoming him, instead what he does is he kills some of Odysseus's men and has them for dinner, right? So major violation of civilization because it's cannibalism, but also the idea of turning your guests into food. That's really very much a violation of Xenia. Circe, when we first meet her, turns Odysseus's men, or some of Odysseus's men, into swine. She does that by tricking them. She sort of greets them, welcomes them, and then gives them wine, but the wine is drugged and they turn into swine. She, of course, has magical powers, but the point is, again, this is not how you treat your guests. Now, Circe ends up becoming sort of the perfect hostess, but when we first meet her, not so. The suitors, on the other hand, are really bad guests. So they are not really welcome in Odysseus' house. Odysseus isn't there to stop them, and Telemachus, Odysseus' son, is too young to really sort of stop them. And so they've basically taken over the palace, and they're basically eating Odysseus sort of out of house and home. Now, they're not going to bankrupt him, but the point is, that's not what you do if you're a guest. You keep your visit short. You don't extend your stay beyond the time that you are welcome. And, of course, they're also planning to kill Odysseus if Odysseus does show up, which, again, violation of Xenia. The scholarship for chapter 12 looks at the idea of the quest hero. This is something we already saw a little bit with in looking at Prop, right? Because Prop is looking at quest heroes. There's a discussion of Joseph Campbell's work. This was the work that sort of put him on the map, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And basically that book is about what he calls the monomyth. So his claim is that basically all hero stories are the same story, right? Any quest story is the same story. It's got a different face on the hero, but it's the same. So Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, that's another example of the monomyth. And in fact, George Lucas was inspired by reading Campbell's work to sort of develop the idea of Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars films. The scholarship section comes from a famous British poet named W.H. Auden, who wrote like an article on the quest hero. And one of the things that he says about the quest hero is the quest heroes is sort of part of all of us. And it's one of the appeals. He has 6 characteristics of the quest hero, but he also sort of says that part of the reason this appeals to us is all of us are on a quest. Our life is a quest, right? We're traveling through time, and over time, we're looking for something, and we either find it or we don't find it. But that makes that type of story appealing. And then finally, the comparison section deals with Aeneas. Again, a selection from the Aeneid from Book 6. But the Aeneid as a whole can also be seen as a homecoming story, but it's a homecoming story with a difference. So Odysseus is trying to get back to his home, the place that he came from. Aeneas has to leave the place that he's from. He's from Troy, but he has to find a new home, and that new home will basically be a place in Italy that will ultimately lead to the founding of Rome. He doesn't found Rome, he doesn't settle in Rome, but he's sort of an integral part in the founding of Rome according to the stories. So Rome, in a sense, becomes, and this for Romans, reading the Aeneid or hearing the Aeneid read, this would be very appealing to them, right? Because it represents this sort of ideal home. I mean, it would be somewhat similar. There were lots of movies that I remember seeing that were from the 30s and 40s that dealt with the immigrant experience in America. And all of them basically are paeans to America, that how great is America. The people came from their homelands. They left their home to find a new home here. And so that same sort of appeal, I think, would be part of the appeal of the Aeneid to Roman audiences. The selection comes from Book 6, and that Book 6 is based on Book 11 of the Odyssey, the travel to the underworld. Aeneas goes to the underworld to see his dad, to get information about what he needs to do next. But what he sees instead is he sees a parade of ghosts of dead Trojans who are going to, over a period of time, become Roman heroes. And so in a sense, he gets to see a parade of Roman heroes, and he gets to sort of learn what it means to be a Roman, which is an important sort of fulcrum for his transformation from Trojan hero to Roman hero. The scholarship section deals with African American stories of travel. And historically, there is the Great Migration. This is the thing that happened in the 20s and 30s, and when blacks left the South and came north to Detroit, to Chicago, to New York, to places where they might actually find employment. And the literary selection that's part of this is a poem by Sterling Brown called "The Odyssey of Big Boy." And it's basically told from the perspective of Big Boy. And Big Boy is a guy who's a traveling man. He likes to travel around. And actually what he likes more than anything else is to travel. Now that is somewhat different than Odysseus. Odysseus likes learning things. He likes testing sort of the minds of people and finding out where they're from and all that. But he wants to get home. I mean, he has a home to go to. He wants to get home. In the case of Big Boy really doesn't have a home. There isn't a place where he can put down his hat. He's basically always going to be traveling, and he likes that. But it also shows, I think, some of the uncertainty of the African American experience. So that's those are some things to consider in looking at Chapter 12, which looks again at Odysseus, looks at the quest hero. And Odysseus, his quest is to get home. Oftentimes quests are to get something or to save someone, but in this case it's to get home. And then we see how that's sort of subverted somewhat by in the Aeneid, where there is a homecoming of sorts, but it's not in Aeneas's land. And then in the case of Big Boy and the African American males who traveled around trying to find jobs, but always were sort of like people who had to keep on the move. They weren't people with a home. So see you next time. We'll be looking at chapter 13.